Welcome to Deep Sleep Stories. Tonight's tale is one of quiet paths, distant mountains, and the kind of journey that begins not with a question, but with silence. Settle in. Breathe slowly. And if this kind of storytelling brings you peace, I invite you to subscribe and join us again. Every week, a new journey. Every night, a gentler ending. Now, let the story begin. Location: a mountain village at the base of the northern ridge. Autumn. Crisp air. Mist curling around steep slopes and wooden rooftops. The first cold had come early. It settled into the cracks of the village like an old story, slow, certain, and unwelcome. A wind whistled down from the northern cliffs, threading its way through moss-covered shingles and chattering under the doors. Wood smoke hung low in the air, curling upward in sleepy columns, the scent of pine and iron and something older. Elias stood beside the hearth, pulling on a pair of boots that had not touched snow in 5 winters. Their leather was dry but still good. He worked the laces with gloved hands, slow and steady, like someone unearthing a part of himself he hadn't used in a long time. On the table behind him, a letter lay open, creased and soft from having been folded, unfolded, and read again. "If I find her, I'll return by Friday. If I don't follow me. But you'll come anyway." It was Luka's handwriting, sharp, hasty, but clear. Elias hadn't replied. He knew there was no one to reply to. Outside, the slope behind the house dropped into a stand of crooked fir trees, where frost gathered like ash across the leaves. A small stone shelter, half hidden by bramble, stood near the edge of the forest. That was where he went next. He unlocked it with an iron key he wore around his neck. Inside, a coil of rope, an old pickaxe, a canister of matches, a pair of leather gloves with the fingertips worn through. And beneath all of that, carefully wrapped in oilcloth, a map. Yellowed, smoothed by time. In the upper corner, written in Luka's hand, was a small arrow and one word there. Elias traced it with a thumb, eyes unreadable. He packed without sound. No ceremony. No hesitation. Just as the sun began to lower, turning the mist gold where it clung to the fields, a voice called from behind the garden wall. "Elias!" It was Daniel, younger, sharper, built like someone used to carrying more than his own weight. He wore a heavy vest, ropes over one shoulder, and an expression that always bordered between determination and mischief. "We heard you're heading up," Daniel said, coming closer. "The pass. The wild trail. The one they closed after the rock slide." Elias said nothing. Just pulled the straps on his pack tighter. Daniel gestured over his shoulder. "Finn and we've got gear. Good stuff. We just need someone who knows the way. You're the name they gave us." From around the corner came the second man, Finn. He was quiet, as promised. His coat was dark, his camera older than him. He offered a small nod in greeting but said nothing. He rarely did. Daniel rubbed his gloves together. "We're not tourists. We're careful. We know how to move." Still, Elias didn't speak. Then he turned to them, the first time he'd really looked. His eyes were pale, not cold, just distant. "I'll take you," he said. "But on my terms. No questions. No hurry. And return back if I say so. No argument." Daniel looked at Finn, who shrugged and nodded. "Deal." Elias gave one final glance to the sky. Then he began to walk. They followed, past the edge of the garden, where a rusted weather vane spun in the wind, past the wooden gate that hadn't been latched in years. The trail started just behind the sheep pens, marked only by a split stone and a ribbon of moss. As they walked, the air thickened. The trees leaned inward. The mist deepened into fog, swallowing the ridge above. At one bend in the trail, Finn paused. He lifted the camera and snapped a photo. Elias, a few paces ahead, was little more than a silhouette now, broad shoulders, pack firm against his back, ice axe hanging like memory from his hip. Just mist beyond him. No horizon. Only gray. Finn lowered the camera. Quietly, he said, "He's not leading us." Daniel looked sideways. "What do you mean?" Finn kept his eyes on the man ahead. He's following something. Setting, a narrow mountain saddle at sunrise, leading toward the infamous Scree Pass. Loose stone, steep slope, sharp wind. Autumn's breath is sharp here. The cold woke first. It whispered down the cliffs before dawn, long before the light, brushing the sleeping camp like a ghost's passing hand. Elias was already awake. He sat motionless on a flat stone, gloved hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed on the shadowed line where the trail would appear once the sky turned. The other stirred slowly, Finn, careful and quiet, rising from his bedroll like a leaf shaken loose from sleep. Daniel stretched with a groan, muttering to himself about cold socks and bad dreams. By the time the first gold touched the sky, they were walking. Elias led. Silent. Sure-footed. Each step placed as if it belonged to the mountain itself. His movements weren't fast, but they never paused. He knew this place, not by map, but by memory. Daniel came second, never silent. "This incline's steeper than the projection," he said, checking his GPS unit. "We could have cut through that ravine to the east, might save 30 minutes. Elias said nothing. Daniel adjusted the strap of his harness. "He doesn't even use a tracker," he muttered toward Finn. "He's got, stones in his head. He's leading us on gut feeling and a half-dead map." Finn didn't answer. His camera hung at his side. Occasionally, he lifted it to catch a pale burst of sunlight through the mist, a curled pine silhouetted against the rise, or Elias's silhouette framed against a snow-dusted ridge. By midday, the trail narrowed to a crease in the slope, stone to one side, sheer drop to the other. Ahead, the mountain yawned upward. The Scree Pass. Elias paused, one foot resting on a shelf of frost-glazed shale. He crouched low, brushed the loose rock with his gloved fingers. Then he stood, scanned the slope, and pointed toward a barely visible ledge that traced the side of the cliff like a scar. "We go there." Daniel squinted. "That's a goat path, not a trail. It's the only way. There's a better angle if we swing low and cut across." "I can." But his foot had already shifted. The scree slipped beneath him, a sound like broken glass sliding down a steel sheet. His boot lost grip. His knee buckled. Then, in a single motion, Elias reached out, grabbed the rear loop of Daniel's harness, and yanked him back to balance. Not rough. Not dramatic. Just practiced. Elias didn't raise his voice. He only said, "Here, the paths aren't easier. They either are, or they're not." Daniel looked away, breathing hard. They roped in after that. As Finn clipped a safety line into place, his hand brushed something cold, a metal glint tucked under a shard of stone. He pulled it free. A carabiner. Modern. Polished. The initials LR engraved in the curve. "Elias," Finn said softly. The older man turned. He took the carabiner in hand, weighed it without words. His thumb ran once across the engraving. Then he tucked it into his coat and moved on. "No one asked?" They reached a resting point just beneath the highest pitch, a narrow ledge with a view across the chasm. Clouds moved fast here, running like wild dogs across the ridge. As the wind stilled for a breath, Elias crouched near a flat stone. A mark. The rock was worn smooth at the edge, as if someone had sat here, waiting. A knife had been sharpened recently, tiny grooves still fresh. And beside it, half flattened in the frost, an empty wrapper from an energy bar. Daniel stood behind him. "That was him, wasn't it?" Elias didn't answer. Instead, he reached slowly into the side of his coat and pulled out a small object, a folding knife, worn, familiar. The handle bore a faint carving, a pair of wings half faded. "Luka's." He turned it in his palm, then slipped it away again. The climb resumed. The ledge grew steeper, narrower. The scree hissed under each step. They moved like a slow breath, one after the other, clipped to the same line, bound not by trust, but necessity. By the time they reached the shelf above the pass, the sun had dipped behind the western slope. The world turned copper and blue. That night, they made camp on a narrow bluff beneath a sheer face of granite. Finn sat cross-legged beside the fire, reviewing the day's images on his camera. Most were fog and stone. Blurred edges. Shadows between peaks. But one caught his breath. Near the middle of the frame, hardly visible at first glance, a sliver of color. Against a jagged outcrop, a thin red ribbon fluttered in the wind. He stood. "Elias," he said. The old man stepped over, leaned in. Finn zoomed in. The ribbon was tied around a spike driven into the rock. Not random. Not weathered. Fresh. Elias stared at the photo. Then he stepped toward the edge of camp, where the stone overlooked the pass. He placed his hand against the cold granite, as if listening. And he said, not loud, not soft, just true. "This isn't just a ribbon." A pause. "It's a sign." His voice was steady. "He's still moving." The mountain had teeth now. Not jagged peaks or sharp ridge lines, but cold. A cold that bit through gloves and stitched itself into breath. That morning, when the three of them broke camp beneath the granite shelf, it was still dark, and the fire was long dead. Their boots cracked the frost with every step, and the sky held no warmth, only the pale, brittle glow of a coming storm. Ahead lay the gully. Elias called it the Winter Gate. A narrow wound on the northern face, steep, silent, and glazed in ice. They reached its mouth by mid-morning. The walls rose tight on both sides, black stone sheathed in old frost. A faint blue sheen clung to the surface, like glass. Mist rolled upward from below, curling into the air like smoke without fire. Daniel stood at the edge, staring in. "This looks unstable," he said quietly, pulling his hood tighter. "We could swing around through the southern ridge. It's longer, but safer." Elias checked the straps on his pack. "He wouldn't have taken the ridge." Daniel frowned. "How can you be sure?" Elias's answer came without pause. "His knees. He never trusted them. He always chose the steeper line. Shorter. Riskier. Always." Finn adjusted the settings on his camera. His fingers were red from the cold, the lens fogged from breath. He didn't speak. They began the ascent. Crampons dug into the ice with a soft, steady rhythm, chuck-chuck, chuck-chuck. The silence was complete, save for the sound of metal meeting glacier. The rope between them swayed slightly, like breath drawn in tension. The air here had teeth too, not biting like wind, but sharper. Cleaner. It asked for silence. One mistake, and the mountain would take back its stillness. Halfway up, the ledge narrowed. Finn placed his boot carefully, too carefully. The point missed its bite. Ice cracked beneath him with a sound like splintering bone. His balance shifted. He slipped. The rope snapped taut. He dropped a meter, then two, swinging outward, feet kicking at the wall, camera swinging wildly at his chest. His breath vanished into a gasp. Daniel's hands moved instantly. He slammed his axe into the ice, wrapped the rope twice through a belay hook, and locked it. The impact jarred them both, but held. Finn dangled there, eyes wide, chest heaving. Elias was already beside him, calm, wordless. He reached down, took Finn by the harness, and pulled. Finn scrambled upward, knees bruised, palms scraped raw through the gloves. When he was safe again, crouched against the frozen wall, he whispered, "I thought that was it." Elias looked at him, steady. "Now you know," he said softly, "how quickly everything ends." They climbed in silence after that. The gully narrowed again. A small shelf offered space to pause. Elias moved ahead, checking each foothold with quiet precision. Then he stopped, not because of danger, but something else. Embedded in the wall of ice, halfway up a jagged overhang, was a dark shape. Cloth. Faint red thread. He drew his knife. Chipping carefully, he carved around the edges. Ice broke in pale shards, catching light like crushed glass. And then it gave. A torn sleeve, frozen solid, still clinging to a shred of shoulder lining. Red stitching along the cuff. The exact jacket Luka had worn. Elias held it in his hands. The others waited. He didn't speak. But something in his face, in the way his fingers folded the fabric once, then again, changed. His eyes didn't shine, but they filled. With snow. With silence. With something neither past nor present. Then, quietly, he placed the sleeve into the side pocket of his coat. And continued upward. They reached the top of the gully by late afternoon. The slope flattened into a wind-bitten plateau, where the frost came in waves, thin and hungry. They dropped their packs by a wall of stone and let their breath settle. Finn crouched to take a photograph of the light angling across a sheet of rime. Then he saw it. A flat-faced stone near the edge. Not natural. He brushed away the snow. Carved into the surface, a simple X, and a date. He called Elias over. The old man stood for a long time, staring. "I carved marks like this," he murmured. "When I was young. To trace the way back." He knelt, ran a hand across the carving. "It's his. It's the date." Daniel stepped beside him. "How long ago?" Elias didn't answer at first. Then, 2 days, after he was supposed to be home. The cold pressed in. But suddenly it felt less empty. Not safer. Not warmer. But closer. Daniel looked toward the darkening sky. "The storm's coming," he said. His voice was quiet, but firm. "We either move forward now." A pause. "Or we stay here forever." The wind found them first. It slipped through the stone teeth of the ridge and wrapped around their shoulders like an old warning. Thin at first, like a whisper, but with weight behind it, the kind that gathers fast and leaves frost in its wake. They climbed the last edge of the gully and stepped out onto the plateau. It opened wide, the kind of space that made silence louder. A long, sloping stretch of open tundra, coated in ice-tipped grass and scattered stones, with the remains of shepherd huts huddled low along the incline. Some were just piles of collapsed walls. Others still stood, hunched against the sky like they'd been waiting. Above them, the clouds pressed low. Not just gray, but heavy. Moving. And beneath the shifting curtain of mist, far in the distance, something caught the light. Finn stopped, camera halfway to his eye. There. Through a gap in the clouds. Rooftops. Slanted. Narrow. 3 or 4 of them, clustered together on a shelf of land below the next ridge. A village. Or something like one. Daniel narrowed his eyes. "We should wait," he said, watching the sky with tension in his jaw. 2 hours, maybe less, and we'll be under it. That storm will hit hard. If it catches us on this slope, in the open, we won't make it," he added. "Not without a shelter." Elias didn't stop walking. He simply said, "He could have reached it. I won't wait." Daniel sighed, shifting his pack. "You're gambling with more than time." But Elias was already ahead, moving across the ice-flattened grass without pause. Finn looked once at Daniel, then followed. And Daniel, unwilling to be left alone, fell into step behind them. The wind thickened, pushing sideways now. They pulled storm hoods over their heads, clipped into a shared rope for safety. The terrain dropped into long, sloping ridges, slick and curved, the kind that look soft, but turn to glass underfoot. The visibility narrowed. They moved in single file. Time shrank. Then Elias slowed. A flat rock stood at the top of a low rise. Carved into its surface, faint but fresh, a heart. Inside it, the letter L, and beside it, a second mark. Not quite a letter. Perhaps the start of one, or the edge of another. Elias crouched, tracing it with his gloved fingers. The wind pulled at his coat. "He found her," he said, voice thin but certain. "He left this for someone to know." Then came the pause. His head bowed slightly. "But if he made it to her, why didn't he come back?" No one answered. They stood still for a long breath. Then the sky cracked. A flash, cold and white, lit the clouds behind them. Thunder rolled a second later, low and wide. The first flurries of snow came sideways, not falling but flying. Sharp as salt. Finn wiped ice from his lens and raised the camera. Through the mist, he caught a shape. A roofline, and above it, A thread of motion. Smoke. He inhaled sharply. There's someone there, he said. Look, one of the chimneys. There's smoke rising. Daniel leaned in. You sure it's not Cloud? Finn shook his head. It's too solid. Someone's alive. Elias's voice came steady. Or waiting. They pressed forward. The wind screamed now, raw, tearing across the slope, swallowing sound. Their boots scraped over slick rock and mud, and the rope between them pulled taut like a lifeline. Visibility dropped. Snow thickened. The world shrank to what was 10 feet ahead, no more. Then a wall. Stone. Dry. One of the huts. They stumbled inside, shaking snow from their shoulders. The door creaked shut behind them, barely holding against the wind. Inside, it was empty. Cold. But still. A relief from the roar. Daniel moved to one side, brushing snow from a broken shelf, and froze. A wooden plaque. Weathered. Hand-carved. Maria. The name was faint, but there. This was hers, he said. Luka's sister. This shelter, he must have known about it. Elias didn't speak. He moved to the corner, pulled something from the lining of his coat. A folded letter. Edges worn, paper soft with age. He unfolded it slowly. His voice came low, barely audible over the storm outside. If I ever find her, I'll stay. Not forever. Just long enough to feel real. Just give me time to reach her. He folded the letter again. Placed it back near his heart. Outside, the wind rose once more. But this time, it didn't feel like the end. It felt like a beginning. The wind had moved on. But the silence it left behind stayed. The storm had broken overnight, but it had not fully passed. It lingered in the clouds, thick and low, dragging their bellies across the ridgelines, and in the air, sharp and damp, as though the world hadn't exhaled yet. They moved quietly, bodies sore, breath thin, limbs layered in frost-stiffened gear. The snow underfoot was soft from melt, but still held shape. No one had spoken since morning. The village came into view slowly, like something remembered before it was seen. First the slope, then the uneven pattern of rooftops, some intact, some collapsed, scattered like bones along the mountainside. Finn was the first to raise his head fully, his lens fogged from breath. Through it, he captured a narrow glimpse, a crooked roof, a leaning chimney and smoke. Thin but rising. There, he murmured. Elias didn't break stride. He had seen it too. The others followed his pace, not hurried, but full of quiet urgency. The village was smaller than expected. Perhaps 6 buildings. 7 if you counted the one already lost to rot and gravity. No footprints in the snow. No movement behind the boarded windows. Doors bolted. Wood warped. But one door open. Slightly. As if left that way on purpose. The 3 of them approached in silence, boots muffled by fresh snow, ropes still clipped between them in case the terrain turned against them again. Elias stepped in first. It was warmer than the world outside, though not by much. The hearth was down to coals, glowing orange, breathing slowly in their bed of ash. A teacup sat on the table. Still half full. Still faintly warm. Daniel bent over it. This isn't old, he said. Someone was here. Maybe an hour ago. 2 at most. The air was thick with absence. Not abandonment, but delay. As if the person had only just stepped out and might return at any moment. On the side table, an old journal lay open. Elias passed his hand over the page, but did not read it. He moved instead to the shelf above the bed, where a small, dust-covered frame leaned against the wall. Inside, a photograph. 2 children, seated together on a wooden bench. Black and white. Blurred at the edges from age and sun. One of them was Luka. Much younger, 8, maybe 9. His face thinner, mouth half open in a crooked grin. Beside him, a girl. Braided hair, no expression. Elias stared at it a long time. Finn reached into his coat and pulled out the wooden plaque they had found in the storm shelter. He handed it over without a word. Maria, it said. Carved by hand. Elias didn't speak. He only lowered his gaze to the floor, then to the photograph again. It was the house. His wife's. Or it had been, 2 decades past. Before everything fell quiet between them, Daniel opened a hatch in the floor. A root cellar. Dusty air greeted them as they descended. The cold settled lower here. Everything smelled of dry wood and time. A broken lantern. Crates long empty. A doll, pale and soft with age, resting gently beside a folded quilt. And tucked between the beams, a note, yellowed and folded once. Finn found it. He opened it carefully and read aloud. Luka, if you come, find me where the bell burns. I waited. No name. Just that. They climbed back to the surface. Elias stepped out into the open light, now thinned by the rising fog. His boots crunched across the frost. He stared ahead, toward the slope that crested near the far end of the village. There, just beyond the last house, stood a small chapel. Its bell tower had collapsed halfway, the bell itself cracked and leaning, as though listening sideways. The cross was missing. But the door still hung on one hinge, swaying slightly with the wind. He walked toward it. The others followed in silence. As they neared, the wind calmed again, almost respectfully. The bell rope hung still beside the frame, wet but taut. Recently handled. Recently tied. Elias reached out, pressed his fingers to the rope. It was warm. Not from fire. From contact. He whispered. He came here. This is where she waited. A pause. The words felt heavy in his throat. Maybe she never left. Finn had turned back toward the ridge. Tracks. A narrow trail of boot prints. Only one set, maybe 2, leading away from the chapel. Not toward the village, but up. Higher. They vanished into a sharp ridge cut. At the end, a sheer drop. Daniel joined him, scanning the slope. He either climbed further, or went with someone. The snow began again. Small flakes, barely there. Elias looked toward the bell. Then touched the rope again, gently. Someone is still here. A whisper. And they're waiting. They followed the tracks uphill. The snow was fresher here, thinner in some places, deeper in others. The trail winding higher into the white where sky and ground blurred into one colorless line. The ridge above the village was narrow and sharp, like the back of a blade. And above that, beyond where any path had ever been carved, was the pass. Locals called it the edge. No trails led there. No markers warned of it. It was where the world simply stopped. Elias stood at the base of the slope, one boot already in the snow. If he was trying to reach the pass, he said, it means he was looking for a new way down. Or, he paused. He wanted to disappear completely. Daniel pulled his coat tighter, eyes narrowed at the peaks above. This isn't a search anymore. It's a ghost hunt. Elias said nothing. He turned and began climbing. They tied in again, tighter this time. Elias led, Daniel second, Finn in the rear, camera packed away. No one had hands to spare now. The incline sharpened. Snow blew in sideways gusts. Rocks jutted like broken teeth from the drift. They climbed in silence. One wrong move, and the wind would not give them back. Halfway up the cornice ridge, Finn slipped. His foot punched through a crust of snow and vanished. He let out a sharp breath as his weight tilted. The slope dropped away beneath him. Daniel threw his weight backward, anchoring them both with a shout. The rope went tight. Finn's other foot found grip. He caught himself. They all froze for a beat. Then Elias's voice, firm as stone. There is no second chance up here. You do it right, or not at all. No one answered. They climbed. At the crest of the ridge, the snow flattened, a narrow shelf, barely 2 paces wide. The wind screamed louder now, constant and cold, pulling at their clothes, flinging powder into their eyes. Elias reached the top first. He stopped, crouched low near a dark patch in the snow. Something metallic had been half buried beneath a drift. He brushed it clear. A thermal blanket, torn at the edge. Next to it, a small weathered notebook. A phone, shattered, battery swollen, screen spidered like ice. He opened the notebook with care. Only a few pages had writing. And only one message that mattered. I found her. She doesn't want to come back. I'll stay the night. If I leave in the morning, I'll head over the ridge. If you're reading this, I'm still thankful. The handwriting was Luka's. Elias didn't need to wonder. He knew the shape of each letter. He'd taught him to write. He closed the notebook with both hands, holding it like something alive. Behind him, Daniel scanned the horizon. The clouds had thickened again. Dark. Moving fast. This storm's going to cut us off. We need to turn back. We got what we came for. Elias didn't move. Finn looked between them. If he crossed the ridge. Elias finally turned. His face was unreadable, but something in his eyes had cracked open. I'm going to the end, he said. If Luka stepped past this place, then I need to see it. They pressed forward. The last stretch was less a path and more an unraveling of stone, slick boulders, sharp ridges, snow swirling into every crevice. And then, at the highest point, they found it. A ledge. Flat and cold. Wind-scoured and narrow. In the center stood a squat outcrop of stone, shaped like a seat. Not carved by hands, but weathered into form by time. Across its face, someone had scratched words. Faint, but still legible. I saw. I came. I wasn't afraid. Elias reached out, touched the stone with his bare hand. This was him, he said softly. He stood here. He didn't cry. But the weight in his voice was the weight of years. The wind tore across the ledge. Then, Finn shouted, voice rising above the howl. Look! They all turned. Far below, between two spires of broken stone, a figure. Tiny. Distant. Human. Moving. They couldn't tell if it was a boy or a girl, Luka or someone else. The fog curled around them too quickly, and just as suddenly, they were gone. But the motion had been real. Elias took a long breath. We'll descend, he said. But not the way we came. He looked at the others. We follow that path. Down to where it leads. Daniel stared at him. You really think he's still alive? Elias didn't answer. He only repeated more quietly. We follow him. To the end. They did not return the way they came. The ridge behind them was already disappearing into the fog, the peaks swallowed by drifting white and the hush that comes after choosing not to turn back. There was only forward now, down the eastern face, toward the unknown slope where no trail existed, where nothing official had ever been mapped. The figure they'd seen, fleeting, half glimpsed through cloud, had pulled them into a different journey. It wasn't caution that kept them quiet. It was knowing they couldn't unmake this step. If that wasn't him, Elias said, voice low, then it's someone who saw him. And if it was him. He paused, eyes scanning the jagged drop ahead. He's still moving. And he doesn't have much time. They adjusted gear without speaking. The rope was checked. Gloves tightened. Ice axes readied. Elias went first, his boots finding deliberate purchase on ice-glazed stone. Daniel followed, breath already visible in the chilled air. Finn came last, slower than the others, his breath ragged from the altitude and tension, but steady in purpose. His camera hung near his chest, tucked under his coat, always near but for now forgotten. The slope was a patchwork of snow and rock, descending in studded levels, some smooth, others broken with sharp steps, hairline cracks in stone, and the thread of void just beneath the surface. Wind moved in irregular gusts. Not constant, not predictable. It pressed from the left, then the right, then stopped, leaving them in a silence that rang in the ears. About 20 minutes down, Elias stopped. Just ahead, half hidden beneath a shelf of fractured shale, was a scrap of fabric. Wedged beneath a small stone. He reached for it carefully. Blue. Frayed. Torn at the edge. A piece of jacket, wind-worn and dusted with snow. He turned it over in his hands. "This is his," he said. Finn crouched beside him. "Left on purpose?" Elias nodded. "He was marking the way. He wanted someone to follow." Daniel looked back up the slope. He was still thinking clearly, then. Still hoping someone would come. They moved forward, slower now. With purpose. The next turn was sharper, tighter. A place where the ledge narrowed to a single boot's width. Snow drifted in from above, whipped sideways by the ridge wind. Each step demanded silence. Then the stone gave way. Daniel's boots slipped. Just enough. The crack of rock beneath him echoed like thunder. Loose scree and snow peeled down the slope in a sudden rush, dragging dust and sound with it. Elias shouted, "Hold!" They scattered, each flattening into the stone. A spill of debris roared past, hissing as it slid down and away, vanishing into the white below. When the world settled again, the trail behind them was gone. Wiped clean. Finn looked back, panting. No way up now. Elias didn't glance over his shoulder. We're not meant to go back. Below the slide, the mountain folded into itself, a shadowed hollow where snow had gathered in strange patterns. There, beneath an overhang, Finn spotted something dark. A backpack. Old. Sun-bleached. Half covered by a drift. They approached together. Inside, a crumpled tarp. An empty flask. A torn glove. And a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges, sealed only by the weight of time. Elias took it with both hands. Unfolded it. His breath caught before he even read. "I couldn't leave her without a word. If you're here, then it's not too late. There's a path below. I believe you'll find me, Dad." Elias held it like it might vanish. His thumbs pressed into the corners. His hands shook. Finn and Daniel stood back, quiet. Not out of distance, but respect. Farther down, the trail narrowed one last time before fading into the cliff's edge. Beyond, the mountain dropped toward a dense grove of pine. The valley stretched out, still misted, still uncertain. Finn lifted his camera, steadied it. There. He pointed. Far below, through the trees, a roof. Wooden. Narrow. Tilted sideways on the slope. Smoke rose from its chimney in a lazy, wavering column. Then something shifted near it. A figure. Too small to name. Too far to define. But there. Alive. Watching. Finn lowered the camera. Someone's there. Elias looked down, then at the letter in his hand. "If it's him," he said, voice barely more than breath. "I won't ask questions." His eyes stayed on the smoke. "I won't need to hear a thing." A pause. "I'll just hold him. That'll be enough." And together they began the final descent. The trees gave way like a curtain pulling back. They stepped down through the thinning pines, boots crunching softly over frost-hardened needles. The wind had quieted to a whisper now, not gone, just listening. Snow clung to the low branches, catching pale light in silence. And then they saw it. Nestled on the curve of the slope was a cabin. Wooden. Crooked. Not new, but not forgotten either. Its roof was patched in places, edges dark with age, and a chimney rose from its center, releasing a thin ribbon of smoke into the gray air. The clearing around it looked untouched by time. A stone wall to the side, a coil of rope and a bucket frozen in place. A low fence barely standing. Bunches of dried herbs hung under the eaves, gently swaying, their scent faint but still alive. Wood was stacked neatly beside the door, some pieces cracked, some freshly split. It looked like a place someone lived in, not just survived. They stopped at the edge of the trees. Daniel said nothing. Finn lowered his camera. Elias was the last to move. He stepped forward alone, his pace even, though slower now. His fists were clenched inside his gloves, not from anger, but from the cold, and something older than that. His breath was deep, his eyes steady. He crossed the snow-covered yard, each footfall leaving a crisp, careful mark. When he reached the steps, he paused, not because he doubted, but because the moment before knocking is sometimes harder than the climb itself. He raised one hand and knocked. Just once. Silence. Then, the sound of slow, careful footsteps on wooden floorboards. A pause. A creak. The door opened. A young man stood in the frame. Thin. Pale. Eyes shadowed with exhaustion, but sharp and awake. His hair was longer now. His coat unfamiliar. But his face still his. Still Luka. Elias stared. So did Luka. For a moment neither spoke. They simply breathed. Then Elias said, rough and quiet, "Luka?" Luka blinked, almost as if startled by the name. "I thought," he began. His voice caught. "I thought maybe you wouldn't come." Elias stepped closer. "I always come," he said. "Always." They stood there, the cold curling around them, while something warmer passed between their silence. Then Luka opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the cabin was dim and warm. A fire crackled low in the hearth. The scent of smoke, tea, and pine needles drifted through the air. A teapot steamed on a flat stone near the fire. 2 mugs waited, one already half filled. A shelf of old books leaned against the wall, spines worn and soft. A wool blanket lay folded on the bench. Elias sat, slow and careful. Luka poured tea without being asked. He handed the cup to his father, then sat across from him. "You found her?" Elias asked. Luka nodded. "Yes. Maria's alive. She's been up here for years. She's not well. And she doesn't want to go back." Elias waited. Luka's voice was steady, but low. "She said the world was too loud. Too fast. She asked me not to try to bring her down. Just to sit with her. To let it be." "How long were you with her?" 3 days. Maybe 4. Then I tried to go back, but I took the wrong path. Got turned around. The storm came in fast. I found this place by accident." He looked at the fire. "But I stayed on purpose." Elias didn't press him. He only said, "You're alive. I'm not asking for anything more than that." Luka was quiet. Then he asked, "Do you forgive me?" Elias didn't hesitate. "I'm just glad I can hold you again." He rose. Luka did too. They met in the middle of the room. And embraced. Not quickly. Not tightly. But fully. Long enough for the mountain to disappear outside. Long enough for silence to feel safe again. Finn watched from the doorway. He raised his camera. Then lowered it. Some moments weren't meant for film. Luka reached for something on the shelf, a cloth-wrapped bundle. "She left this for you," he said. "Before I came down." Inside was a small wooden cross carved by hand. Smooth with time. And a note. "Tell him I'm not angry. I just don't belong to the shadows anymore. I'm in the light now." Elias didn't speak. He folded the note and held it to his chest. Outside, the wind shifted. Daniel stepped out onto the porch. Finn joined him. Daniel looked toward the trees, then back toward the cabin. "We've made it," he said softly. "But now, each of us has to choose where we go next." Morning came with gold. Not sudden, not loud, but slowly, like a curtain lifting from the earth. After days of fog and cloud, the sky returned. It spilled soft light across the trees, touched the frost that lingered on roots and pine needles, and made the world feel less like a memory. Outside the cabin, Luka stood in the clearing. His breath moved in slow ribbons. The air was cold, but no longer biting, and the wind, for once, had nothing to say. Birds stirred in the trees overhead. The mountain, though still vast, no longer loomed. It simply waited. Elias stepped out beside him. They didn't speak at first. The valley stretched wide before them, and the trees shimmered faintly in the morning light. Then Luka said, "I'm not staying." His voice was even. Steady. "But I'm not the same either." Elias looked at him. The lines in his face softened. "I never wanted you to be like me," he said quietly. But now, just be who you are. Luka nodded once. And that was enough. Inside the cabin, Daniel tightened the straps of his pack. Finn closed the last page of the notebook he'd been writing in, tucking it into his coat. The fire had burned low, but no one added more wood. They were leaving. The four of them stepped out together. Elias and Luka in the back, moving slowly. Not out of fatigue, but out of intention. Each step was its own kind of healing. The others walked ahead, giving them space. Not as a gesture, but because it felt right. The trail downward was gentle at first, pine needles soft beneath their boots, patches of yellowed grass curling beside the path. The air was filled with the scent of resin, damp soil, and something sweeter, something warm that drifted between memory and presence. The sun reached over their shoulders. Daniel and Finn walked in near silence, saying little, but silence now felt whole. After a while, Finn stopped to photograph a break in the trees where the light poured in like honey. He lifted the lens, then lowered it. Sometimes, looking was enough. Daniel glanced over and smiled. "You want to go down," he said. "But part of you stays up there, doesn't it?" Finn didn't answer right away. Then, "The part that watches." Later, they stopped for a break near a felled tree with moss on its spine. Luka sat on a stone and pulled a small cloth from his pocket. Inside was a carved figure, no bigger than a thumb. He offered it to Finn. "Maria made this," he said. "She called it the one who watches. Said it was for someone who sees things others miss. I think that might be you." Finn turned it in his hand. The grain of the wood was soft and smooth. The shape was simple, eyes, arms, no mouth. He tucked it gently into his jacket. "Thank you," he said. Daniel leaned against the trunk, arms crossed. He looked toward Elias. "You've gone through almost everything," he said. "What's next?" Elias didn't respond immediately. Then he looked down the trail, toward where the sun struck the far side of the valley. "Now I go forward," he said. "But not uphill anymore." They all stood quietly for a while. When they reached a shallow stream, Elias paused. The water was slow, glassy over dark stones. He pulled something from his coat, an old compass, leather-wrapped and long-worn. The needle still quivered, uncertain but alive. He looked at it once, then tossed it gently into the water. It spun, drifted, vanished beneath a low stone shelf. Luka raised an eyebrow. "Now we won't find our way back." Elias shrugged, a faint smile at the edge of his lips. "I'm not looking for it anymore." They kept walking. The trees thinned as the trail bent around the hill. The sun warmed their backs. Below, the outline of the village came into view, the place where it all began. Roofs and chimneys. Fences and paths. Thin trails of smoke. Finn slowed near a moss-covered stone. Something caught his eye, a flat piece of slate, half buried. He picked it up. A single phrase carved on the surface. "Be still." He didn't show it to the others. He just slipped it into his coat. Not for photos. Not for proof. Just to carry. As they neared the valley, Luka looked ahead, then back to the slope behind them. "Maybe I'll come with you," he said. Back to the village. Maybe further. Elias looked at him, then ahead. "I don't lead anymore," he said. He placed a hand on Luka's shoulder, gently. Evening came quietly. No drama, no wind, just a slow folding of the day into shadow. The last light brushed the village rooftops with gold, then softened into silver, then blue. Leaves drifted down like old thoughts, spiraling across the path that led to Elias's home. Inside, the fire had already been lit. It didn't roar, it murmured. A low, steady crackle that filled the room with its glow. The hearth cast gentle light across wooden beams and worn floorboards. The smell of burning pine mingled with dried herbs and old wool. The four of them sat in its circle, not as travelers anymore, not as seekers, just people. Finn sat cross-legged on the floor, sorting through his photos. He wasn't in a hurry. Each image was touched as if it were a stone found in a stream, something small, meaningful, meant to be held. One photo he lingered on longer than the rest. Luka and Elias, standing together at the threshold of that high cabin. The fog behind them, their arms around each other, neither smiling nor posing, just holding on. He stared at it for a long time, then tucked it away at the back of his journal. Some things are not for sharing. Luka sat near the fire, his hands wrapped around a mug. He hadn't spoken in a while. His shoulders were relaxed. His breath was steady. For once, he wasn't preparing to leave, just sitting present. Daniel sat on the low bench, a blanket folded across his lap, his gaze soft as he watched the flames. Elias was closest to the fire. He always had been. 4 cups steamed on the table. The tea was simple, pine tips, dried mint, and something sweet that none of them named. The silence between them was not heavy. It was full. Eventually, Daniel spoke. His voice wasn't loud, just steady. "When I came into the mountains," he said, "I thought I was supposed to overcome them. Conquer something." He gave a small laugh, not mocking, just honest. "But I didn't win anything. I just started listening." Elias nodded. "That's when the mountain lets you in," he said. "When you stop trying to speak over it." Daniel smiled. "When you listen, you grow, but not taller. Just wider." They chuckled gently. Then Luka spoke, his voice quiet. "She didn't ask me to stay," he said. "But she also didn't ask me to go." They turned to him, letting the words unfold in their own time. "She said the world didn't have to be loud to be real. That her peace was not silence, but stillness." He looked into the fire. "She belonged to that stillness. I think I needed to see it." No one filled the silence after. It didn't need to be fixed. Elias reached under the bench and pulled out a wooden box, old and scuffed. He placed it on the floor between them. "I wrote this once," he said. "For her. I never sent it." He looked at Luka. "It's not an apology. Just the things I couldn't say when it mattered most." Luka opened the box, lifted the letter. He read it slowly, the firelight dancing in his eyes. Then he folded it again, placed it back in the box, and rested his hand gently on the lid. "I think you had a heart all along," he said. "It just wasn't shaped like mine." Elias breathed in once, quietly. And then he stood. From the inside pocket of his coat, he pulled a folded sheet of paper, a hand-drawn route, frayed at the edges, marked with pencil, the trail they had followed to the pass. He looked at it one final time, then stepped to the hearth, and placed it into the flames. It caught, curled, and disappeared. "That path," he said, "I won't trace it again." He turned to Luka. "Now it belongs to you, if you want it." No more was said. The fire whispered its approval. Later, after the tea cooled and the shadows stretched long, the others went to sleep. Only Finn remained. He stood for a while in the warm hush, watching the fire's last breath. Then he reached into his satchel, pulled out one of his photographs, and placed it gently on Elias's table. On the back, he wrote one line. "Some things should stay." Then he turned off the lamp, and walked into the dark. Outside, the leaves continued to fall. The crickets sang. And the hearth, though fading, still held the shape of light. "Now you do!" Morning came like a beginning that didn't need to announce itself. The village lay in quiet gold. No mist this time. No cold wind pressing at the walls. Just light, clean, soft, stretching from the mountains to the fields, like a promise that had been quietly kept. Elias stirred before the others. He lit a small kettle and sat beside the window, his hands wrapped around a cup, steam curling against the early sun. Outside, the leaves rustled faintly. The mountains no longer loomed, they watched. Like old friends who had said what they needed to say. One by one, the others woke. Daniel padded into the room, still wrapped in a blanket, eyes half-lidded with sleep. Finn came soon after, already dressed, his pack beside him, the straps neatly looped. Luka appeared last, quietly stepping into the light, hair still damp from a quick wash, the wooden cross of Maria turning slowly in his fingers. No one rushed. The morning held no urgency. Finn sipped from a chipped mug by the door, watching the horizon. Elias stepped beside him. "You're not going back down the same road." Finn shook his head, smiling slightly. "No. I'm not going home. I think I'm going forward. Somewhere." Elias looked at him for a moment. "You know where that is?" Finn shrugged. "No. And I think that's finally good news." Elias nodded, eyes thoughtful. "Sometimes, not knowing is the only way to see what's really there." Daniel emerged, stretching his arms with a groan. "I thought you'd be stricter," he said to Elias. "You know, gruffer. Maybe a bit of a mountain tyrant." Elias chuckled, a dry, soft sound. "I was. For a long time." He sipped his tea. "Then I learned to let silence say what I couldn't." Daniel nodded, grinning. "Silence is cheaper than therapy." They both laughed, short and real. Luka stood near the edge of the yard, looking down the slope. The valley below was green and gold, full of light. One path curved into it, well-worn, familiar. Another stretched the other way, narrower, quieter, and touched less by boot or wheel. He turned the cross over in his hand. "I don't know where my path goes," he said. "But I know what won't be on it." They looked to him. "No more fear," he said. "Whatever comes next, I meet it with open eyes." Elias walked toward him. In his hand, a small item wrapped in cloth, aged, but intact. He held it out to Luka. "My old flask," Elias said. "Carried it for most of my life. Simple. Stubborn. Like me." Luka took it slowly. "Every guy," Elias said, "needs one thing that doesn't change. This was mine. Now it's yours." Luka didn't say thank you. He just nodded once, deeply. Then he stepped forward and hugged his father. Not like a son needing comfort, but like a man who had learned what it was to stand still beside another. The hug was wordless, and enough. When it broke, the morning had warmed further. The breeze moved gently through the tall grass, brushing against their boots. It was time. Finn adjusted his pack. Daniel slung his coat over his shoulder. At the edge of the village, the three of them stood, Luka, Finn, Daniel, each facing a different direction. 3 paths. None of them marked. None of them wrong. Finn turned first. He raised a hand toward Elias, toward Luka, toward the house. Then stepped off the road, into a new unknown. Daniel followed the river path, steady, measured. He glanced back once, not to check if anyone was watching, but just to nod at the place that had changed him. Luka hesitated. He looked at the path he'd taken before, up, into the storm, and then to the one that opened now, wide, quiet, sunlit. He didn't choose with his feet. He chose with a breath. And then walked. Not quickly. Just forward. Elias watched them all go. He stood there for a long while, hands at his sides, the wind in his hair. Then he turned. Not uphill. Not down. But along. Back toward his house. Toward the chair beside the window. The kettle. The fire. The place he had built long ago, not knowing if anyone would ever return to it. Now full. Alive. He walked home without hurry. And behind him, the camera would have pulled up slowly, rising over rooftops, over trees, until the full village unfolded below. Quiet. Rooted. Still. But breathing. The mountains no longer held their shadows. Only light. Thank you for walking with us. This was the path beyond, a quiet close to a story about letting go, returning home, and beginning again. If this journey brought you rest, please consider subscribing to Deep Sleep Stories, where every tale is a candle in the dark, and every voice is a soft companion into sleep. Until next time, be still, and sleep well.